Brandon. I currently live in Puerto Rico. I just started traveling and nomading as of the last 4 months. As I was born and raised in San Jose, California,
Okay.
um, and basically lived in the San Francisco Bay Area for most of my life, basically until the last 4 months.
Yeah.
Um, what would be one thing that would be relevant is when I was in high school and during most of my teens, I was pretty depressed and pessimistic about my whole outlook in life. And I ended up dropping out of college. And by the time I dropped out of college, I had actually resigned to believing that I'm just going to live a mediocre life. So that's kind of where I think that's where my adulthood began.
Where it began.
Um, so maybe that's the intro. Well,
Yeah. No, I
that's where I
mean,
started. Yeah.
fascinating and altogether anyway. Because I'm sure what your lifestyle is like now has been dictated from that moment forward, really, right? I mean,
Yeah. So,
this whole nomadic lifestyle. I mean, you could start there, even just share what that's like, or walk backwards to what prompted you to begin this path.
yeah. I guess in terms of why I'm here, and just life here is, um, I recently got out of a relationship, maybe like 6 months ago, and one interesting pattern in my life is that when I'm not in a relationship, a lot of interesting things and amazing things happen in my life. uh, and yeah, basically, when the pandemic started, I actually had already intended to travel a bit because I didn't see any clear reason why I was in San Francisco, which is just an extremely high cost of living area.
Yeah.
If with everything going remote, it just didn't make sense anymore. And then a bunch of my friends over the few years of the pandemic, everyone emigrated out. Everyone went to New York or Boston, Austin, Miami, Denver, and Puerto
All over the
Rico. So
place.
um, I'm here in Puerto Rico because the only reason why I ended up staying in San Francisco longer was because I met someone and she wanted to stay in San Francisco, and so now I'm here.
That's what you do. Yeah.
And I run my own company, so I don't really need to be anywhere specific, and
Yeah.
so that's why I'm in Puerto Rico. It's the cost of living is much more friendly, and I also already have friends out here, so that's
Yeah.
kind of what led me to here.
It's kind of refreshing though too. I can imagine that you kind of, I mean, not even take away the freedom of like the fact that you have your own, you set your own rules, as far
Mhm.
as business is concerned, but
Yeah.
the fact that you can kind of pick up and go and that's where your mindset is, because I feel like a lot of people want that, or
Hmm.
want to do that, and they're like, well, XYZ, in your case, like you mentioned, like you were seeing someone, or it's like, oh, I have family, or I've been here all
Yeah.
my life.
Yeah.
um how how do you get to a mindset where it's like, nope, I all of that like doesn't matter, like I want to see what's out there and see what's going on, where how do you get to that point?
I mean, I think one layer that helped because I think I was somewhat in that boat that you had just mentioned, where here are some reasons why I can't, which was my ex wanted to stay there, and the other reason was my mom. When I proposed the idea of me even traveling and moving anywhere, she flipped. She was not happy because I'm the youngest of three kids, and I was the only one that was living somewhat close to her, and she didn't really have that many other relatives around.
Yeah.
And something that happened during the pandemic was my brother decided to move back into the Bay Area. And as a result of that, when I kind of floated the idea of moving somewhere, my mom didn't bat an eye. Because like my brother has grandkids and whatnot.
Yeah.
So I very much think I was in that boat, and my circumstances fortunately changed. If that wasn't there, it probably would have just been a maybe more prolonged argument with my mom, saying like, "Hey, this is the life I want to live.
Yeah.
Let me do this." Um, I think, but to try to get to the essence of your question, um, I think it was one integral part for me was taking time in my early 20s to really decide for myself what kind of life I wanted to live and what kind of values that I wanted to live by, and staying in tune with that. Um, that's one. When you're more in tune with your own internal desires, it becomes a lot easier to buck outside trends or expectations.
Sure.
And I think that's a dynamic that virtually every human is navigating to some extent.
Yeah,
And
I would agree.
the people who are more well versed in tuning into themselves and listening to what they're internally wanting, uh, probably have a better, easier time actually acting on that.
Yeah.
And then that's one layer, and then the other layer is being okay with disappointing people, and being okay that with the stories and conclusions and assumptions they'll make about you and your character based off of the life decisions that you're making.
Yeah.
I think, at least for me, for a lot of my, I don't know, childhood, I was very averse to disappointing anyone, very averse to having people think that I'm a bad guy or like make poor assumptions about me. And I think the older that I'm getting, the less I really care about that, or
Yeah.
or the more okay I am with people arriving to conclusions about me that simply are not true. But I've let go of the need to correct them, or try to cater to their opinion, uh, because it's just, I don't have the energy anymore, and
Yeah.
like, why do I need to convince them? Like, and I think that navigating that, I think those two layers are probably the biggest. So the whole staying in tune with yourself and what your internal desires are, and then like being okay with stories, assumptions, and impressions that people and judgments that people have of you. If you can
Yeah.
navigate those two well, I think you're well on your path to being much more comfortable navigating life on your own terms and in your own
Yeah.
way.
Do you feel that that pressure, that weight of answering those questions, of other people and the perceptions of people, was that weight put on you, or did you put that on yourself, or some combination of the two, do you think?
Um, I mean, there's some interesting research. There's this book called Collective Illusions that I read maybe a year ago that talks about how the being ostracized and like being part of the out group registers in your brain in a very similar way as like physical pain. It's
Yeah.
like getting punched. And so to me, that it makes so much sense with how like getting bullied or getting made fun of in school, like how it creates so much conformity, because like it hurts. It
Yeah.
hurts emotionally, mentally, and uh, according to your brain, it actually feels similar to actually getting punched.
Similar. Yeah.
Um, so I would say both, right?
Yeah.
Purely based off of our biology, it seems like it's something that is done externally to us, um, or it can be done externally to us. And I think, if as a young person who doesn't necessarily have mental tools to separate and process and deal with the emotions that come up with ostracism, or being part of an out group, it becomes a lot harder to find internal agency. So I
Yeah.
would say it's a yes and of, yeah, I think there is some external force that created those expectations. And as a young person, I bought into it because I didn't
Yeah.
know otherwise how to deal with it. I thought that was the only way to live. I didn't know there was another path of like, I could
Yeah.
both feel this pain, process it, feel it, and still continue in it. Um,
Yeah.
I didn't know that that was an option until I kind of just forced myself into it. So I
Look.
would say it's yes and.
Yeah. Looking back, then, I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, I was, for about 10 years, I was a middle school teacher. So, like, the
Mhm.
absolute worst time in your life,
Yeah.
because everything is changing,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
the most authentic person will tell you that that's the worst part of your life. But
Yeah.
9 times out of 10, we don't, until much later on. And they joke about it like, oh man, I hated middle school. But
Yeah.
I think
Mhm.
it's really for that fact right there that, you've just figured out what emotions are, truly, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a better understanding of what they are in the sense that you can say, well, I just cried because I'm sad,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't necessarily know how to navigate that. And then if it's even a stronger emotion or a stronger
Mm-hmm.
traumatic situation, that's when it becomes clear that, those tools are not in your arsenal, at all,
Yeah.
you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
looking back, at that time in your life, because as you mentioned, as you were younger there, what do you wish you knew then, and where do you think it brought you to now as far as life events, or the things that you are processing or processed?
What do I wish I knew in which context? Because there's a lot of things I wish I knew.
As far as navigating, like as you mentioned, the things that you go through, and not
Hmm.
having the understanding of it,
Oh yeah.
what would be the biggest thing that you wish you knew to help kind of get you to the point that you are now in life?
Um, the biggest thing that comes to mind is, man, like I wish I was able to have the perspective that the situation I was in middle school is actually very hard. And I used to coach teens, and I would tell, um, and a lot of them were in high school. I would basically tell them that high school is like the boss mode of life, and adulthood is easier. And a lot of them wouldn't believe me. Um,
Yeah.
and I wish that somehow I would have been able to translate that understanding
Yeah.
into my middle school self of, dude, you're dealing with a low sense of self-efficacy. You don't have a very strong growth mindset. You haven't figured out your kind of social standing, and you don't feel a lot of agency around that. And there's this thing with like having crushes on girls, and you don't know quite how to manage that. And you have all this like incredibly terrible negative self-talk that's like making everything worse. You're getting terrible sleep, and like you're spending so much time gaming, reasonably so, because that's the only avenue you have for escape for
Yeah.
a level in a game that is very hard for you.
Yeah.
um, I wish I just had that perspective that,
Yeah.
hey, this is like legitimately hard, and if I as an adult were put in that situation, I think I would be similarly overwhelmed or
Yeah.
stressed or anxious, and maybe default to similar coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
I think just knowing that as a young person would have helped, like with the self-talk, and not beat myself up further for not doing as well as I would want in all these domains of school, relationships, romance, and relationship with my parents, grades, yada yada yada.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're in some way, like still running away from that? Having this lifestyle of calling yourself nomadic lifestyle. In this
Mm-hmm.
case, like, do you feel
Mm-hmm.
there's some part of you that's still trying to get away from that without truly, answering all those questions that and then feelings that need to be answered, or no?
So like, do you think I'm running away from the those
From
experiences from
from
back in the day?
home, and right, right.
No, I don't think that's happening. I think, I mean, I've done a lot of personal growth, inner work, shadow work, however people call it,
Yeah.
over the years. So I think I've had a tendency, certainly in my 20s, in parts of my 20s, where I've just being avoidant of certain things and aspects of my character were definitely prevalent. But at this point, if there's something that's coming up, I'm often creating space to lean into it and unpacking it and understanding and metabolizing it and trying to gather the wisdom from why that has stuck into my life, or why
Yeah.
that's a emotional sticking point or something. Um, Nomading to me is just more of the financial aspect of my pursuits, of I want to get to the point where I can retire more quickly, and this is the one of the easiest ways that I know to do that, which is just
To do
reduce my
that.
cost of living.
I mean, that's fair. I
Um,
mean, it's fair.
yeah,
I can just see
yeah.
how, when people like see that term,
Mm-hmm.
there's certainly 2 points of that, right? It's
Sure.
the freedom, it's the ability to start just, being with yourself and answering to yourself and not having those constrictions, and doesn't matter what happened. But you could also see how, people looking at it, that going, well, where are you running from? Right? Like,
Sure.
what are you doing? Why aren't you settled?
Sure.
Because the idealized version of life is that you need to settle down, find a home, well, all that kind of stuff, and so it's
Sure.
still, no matter how
Yeah.
many people are doing that, I'm sure it's, way more, twice as many people as it ever was. The perception is still there that, oh, well, they just can't settle down. They're running from something,
Yeah, I definitely feel that. To me, that's one of those other externalized voices that
Yeah.
that's represented in often how my mom talks. Like, when are you going to meet someone? When are you going to meet a nice
Yeah.
Christian girl that you can start a family with? And the cultural pressure of like most people starting to get married around my age and my friend group, settling into long-term relationships, people starting to have kids. So absolutely, I think this just goes back to that thread previously, which is I've been pretty in tune with how I run my life, and my life has been unconventional since I was 19. So I'm now I'm now well over a decade into that process. So I have very little qualms around adding one other layer that is unconventional.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
I mean, and that's, that's, as you mentioned, it's like right after high school, and then that point in life where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you prepared for that. And I mean, going back to, just, rewind to being a middle schooler, like,
Yeah.
that's what they don't tell you, that this is, I would agree, like, this is the hardest part of life all the way forward. And paying attention to the life skills that get taught
Mm-hmm.
here in this stage of your life makes
Mm-hmm.
adulting, I don't know if I would go so far as easier, but more understandable, and certainly more manageable, but we just look at it as a tough period of life, and, oh, they had this childhood or this growing up or all that kind of stuff. And, we don't really pay attention to what we could be helping, that age group, that those, people, going through all that. What are they learning at that point,
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could have like that. My middle school and high school experience were like all those struggles were imbued with so many lessons of life. Like I wish that was the case, but my experience was it was just treading water, and I was just trying to survive because there were just so many things on my plate. I didn't really have space to reflect and integrate and digest. Well, what did this experience teach me? I didn't really have any of those tools until my early mid 20s, and so it was only a lot of reflection after the fact where I feel like the learning kind of really happened. And maybe I guess I've characterized myself as a late bloomer in that sense, where I didn't feel like I really started becoming a thinking individual until I left school and really standing on my 2 feet. So
why do you think that is, or why did you have, what caused the thoughts of like feeling like you're treading water? Because I'm sure a lot of us could go back and say, like, that's exactly what I was doing, right? I mean, for whatever reason, whether that's just the weight of just school in general, that what am I doing this for, to life outside of that. But you specifically, where do those feelings come from?
It was a mix of like not having a clear purpose as to what school is for. I mean, I knew the answer that everyone else gave me, which is like, oh, you're going to school to get good grades so that you can go to a good college so that you can get a job. But that was all conceptual at the time. I didn't have any grounded understanding of what that even meant. And so if you're not bought into the end why, it makes it very hard to engage with the current task at hand, which was study hard. So because that was divorced for me, I found it very hard to stay engaged in school. But at the same time, I had all this pressure from my parents and pressure from friends to do well. So that's already a rock and a hard place with very like polarizing incentives and pulls. On one hand, I have zero engagement, and then on the other hand, I have high expectations. That combined with like I mentioned, being underslept. I was an athlete. I I don't know why I decided to do so many sports. Um, I ended up probably doing 6 hours of sleep on a regular basis in high school, so I'm sure that did not help. So
No.
it was a constant state of waking up tired, trying not to fall asleep in class, but falling asleep anyway, and then trying to like maintain some semblance of decent grades because I was expected to, but I
Because you're,
didn't care to, and I just wanted it all to stop. I just
yeah,
wanted space to breathe. So because of all those layers, I felt like more often than not, I was just doing the bare minimum to get by and just turn off my brain to look for some semblance of solace and rest
yeah,
before I had to do it all over again next week. And that was like all of high school.
yeah. And where do you get that solace, at that point in life? Because I mean, as adults, it's hard enough, right, to
Mm-hmm.
figure out where you're where the pause is coming.
Yeah.
Um, at least it's there. But when you're young, you don't see that window at all because
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if we start back to before high school, I mean, parts of high
Yeah.
school you have a little bit of autonomy that yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
can hang out with my friends, but when you're younger, it's like
Yeah.
your parents are in charge of
Yeah.
most of your activities or being able to get
Yeah.
somewhere or having an escape.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you find that solace at that stage in life, right?
I didn't.
Yeah,
It was like momentary blips of escape of after school sports, and for a few hours my brain wasn't thinking about how terrible all the other aspects of my life were, because I could
yeah,
just drop into the zone and be good at a thing because I had done sports all my life.
yeah,
Um, and then that was probably it. Sleep, that and sleep. Those were the only two domains where
yeah.
I felt some of that. But even then, I had so much trouble falling asleep during those years. So
Sure.
that didn't really help either.
Sure, right. I mean, and that's what they say. I mean, somebody that's going through depression or any high anxiety and things like that, like that's why you want to sleep because that's the only time your brain really shuts off. But at the same
Yep.
time,
Mm-hmm.
your brain doesn't want to shut off, and so you don't
Mm-hmm.
get that solace, that sleep, and
Yep.
it keeps circling
Yeah.
back around. So
Mm-hmm.
then, does that shape your mindset now to some degree? Like, do you feel that looking for that solace, that sleep, all those things, do you feel that yourself being dictated by that
Mm-hmm.
mindset back then, that
Mm-hmm.
like I'm just searching for that moment to just and process everything? Do you feel like that's kind of dictated where you stand today,
No.
or
Do I think that's who's dictated person?
and not even
I
consciously,
mean,
like
yeah. I mean, I think the moment I finished high school and went into college, to me, that was where the real autonomy began. That was the first time I felt like I could actually choose classes and then drop them if I didn't
yeah,
want to do them. And that's what happened. I felt like that was not actually possible in middle school and high school. And like if I didn't like the professor, I could just say I didn't like the professor and then change classes.
yeah,
And I all of a sudden became way more motivated. I actually did 2 years of school in college in the span of a year because I had a lot more autonomy and I felt like I had my own why was answered, which
sure,
was I want to get these out of the way and I want to do some exploration and I want to answer my questions around like what is this career, like what am I meant to do, what am I supposed to do, and I finally had freedom to tinker around with those questions without much restriction. And
yeah,
interestingly enough, like right when that happened, I could finally sleep. Like I never had problems sleeping again after that. And it was partially also the social circle reset. The moment that I went to community college, I was no longer in this bubble of people who knew me. So I had a lot more permission to just be myself or just be a
yeah,
nobody and not have any expectations to live up to.
yeah,
Um, so I think the combination of that, I actually feel like I did find that solace, and I don't think I've ever really left that since because I don't know, all the circumstances of adulting and adulthood are very similar to that. Like you have a
yeah,
lot of choice um, as an adult. or a lot more than you did than I feel like I did when I was
Yeah.
in middle school and high school. So
And I mean, those, like you said, I mean, those choices are yours now, and
mhm.
that can sound like it's such a huge weight and a huge responsibility, but if you've never been given that opportunity to
Oh
make
yeah.
your choices, it can feel absolutely freeing, right? That, like you said, I mean, just as simple as saying, no, I don't want to be in this class or that professor. That sounds
Hmm.
so simple and
Hmm.
meaningless, but
Yeah.
that's powerful for somebody that hasn't had that ability to do that ever.
Yeah, and you're hitting at the other layer, which also was true for me at the same time, which was the having the. There's a book called The Paradox of Choice that talks about how when you have too many choices, it actually becomes overwhelming. And I
Yeah.
remember feeling that as well. So I think both were true, where I felt this massive relief that, wow, I can do whatever I want. And oh, shoot, all at the same time, why are there so many choices? And
Yeah.
that was what also forced me to start thinking about, well, what do I want to optimize for? And like, what are some filters that I can use to help me make decisions and when there's so many choices to make,
Yeah.
and create my own internal sense of what my own internal right is,
Yeah.
rather than trying to, I don't know, just borrow another set of rules that or ideas of success that someone
And
else
not
has
yours.
imposed on me.
Yeah. So
So,
speaking of that, then what would you say is the advice or the guiding light that kind of keeps pushing you forward, each and every day at this point, now that you're kind of free of those, external choices and the choices are yours? What kind of guides your mind each day and your decisions?
um, so, I mean, something that I've done more and more in the last 2, 3 years is having a mental log of things that create emotional highs for me.
Yeah.
Not in the like, not not in the like like honeymoon phase of a relationship kind of high, but like when I coach a student and they see a lot of breakthrough, I notice that I feel high on life after.
Yeah.
When I like build a spreadsheet to like gather some interesting data and like run some basic formulas to find an interesting conclusion about how society and humans work, there's something really fun about that.
Yeah.
So like these are kind of obscure moments that happen throughout my day, or maybe very infrequently. Historically, maybe more infrequently. And learning to notice those things and learning to unpack why it is that that's compelling, and taking more time to see how you can design it more into your life.
Yeah.
That I think is driving most of my decision making right now. Where how can I, um, when I have autonomy, how can I spend that autonomous time doing things that actually light me up and give me excitement, give me joy, um, as small as it might be. I think
Yeah.
that that has been the source of a lot of enjoyment for me, at least as of the last few years. And that's not a practice